Okay, it's 12:03. I feel like that's a fair amount of time. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. So yeah, Suzanne here. I don't know if you can see me. I'm going to pin myself. Looks like we've got 8 people who've joined in. I imagine more people will join in throughout the hour, but just to go over a little housekeeping, we can use the chat feature to talk to each other or ask questions like about maybe like sound or needing to see something closer. But if you have a bike specific question, use the Q&A feature because that's easier for me to monitor. And if I'll be able to interact with Mark, who's in his shop right now and giving all the demonstrations, if say we need to cut in and interrupt him and get more specific. Everybody's cameras and microphones will be turned off until the very end if we need to get into a more specific thing, at which point we'll have kind of a more general Q&A time. But for the most part, feel free to ask questions throughout this. No question too simple or whatever. Don't be shy about it if you have any question at all. And with that, I think, oh yeah, I'm Suzanne. I've been a mechanic and working in bike shops for I think like 15 years on and off. I've worked with BikeWalkKC for the past few years in the education program where we go to schools all throughout the metro and teach kids how to ride safely and be safe pedestrians. I'm also a volunteer at the 816 Bicycle Collective where we help people fix their own bicycles and have tools and resources to help people learn how to do things themselves. So hopefully between Mark and I will be able to answer your questions, but with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Mark and stop my video. So let me pin this video for you, Mark.
I guess I should turn my microphone on.
I can hear you.
Okay, good.
So we have 13 participants now. If you want to get started, introduce yourself, and then we can go over with what we're going to do.
I still see your screen showing up.
Oh, really? Okay.
Without video, it just says.
Did it just change?
Just has your name on it.
Oh, really? Okay. I thought I pinned you. I'm sorry. Sorry. And also sorry, everyone. I am not, for as much as this whole situation has made me learn more about technology, I'm still not a tech person like in this world. I do bikes. Is that the one you want?
That's it. That's
All
it.
Right, cool.
Okay, so good afternoon. My name's Mark. I'm also a mechanic. Suzanne's got more years experience than I do, but somehow I drew the short straw and I'm the talent here today. So if you guys have any questions about things as I'm going through, or just specific questions about your bicycles, feel free to throw them at Suzanne during the program and she'll try to answer them as we go along. And I'll take a few pauses during my delivery just to make sure that if there's any questions about what I just spoke about, we can clear them up before we proceed. Okay, so we're going to try to keep this right around an hour, maybe just a little bit over. I have a tendency to get a little winded or, long-winded, so I'll try to be brief, but I want y'all to feel like you're getting something out of this. And I'm answering your questions. So this is my home shop here in my basement. Had to put up some little backdrops here so you don't see all the unmentionables behind it. What's behind the curtain. But let's go ahead and get started. The way I like to start these programs is just to start with the basics. And I want everybody to be on the same level, on the same vocabulary. So we're gonna start with the vocabulary or parts of a bicycle, just so that everybody knows what I'm saying. There's no confusion. All right, parts of a bicycle. So this is my one of my bikes here. It's the white frame, right? Or all the different tubes are in white here. Each of those has a specific name, and I think it's worth it for everybody to understand what the parts of the bike are, so that if they're speaking to someone at a bike shop or somewhere, they're speaking about using the right language. Okay, so this long tube here on the top is called the top tube. The other second longest tube is called the down tube. Or I guess this could be the longest tube. This would be the second longest. Either way, top tube, down tube. This tube here is called the seat tube. This is the fork. This little short tube here that the fork goes through, that's called the head tube. These tubes that go down here to the rear wheel, they're called stays. This is the seat stay because it comes from the seat tube, and this is the chain stay because it runs alongside the chain. So seat stay, chain stay, seat tube, top tube, down tube, head tube, fork. All right, so that's the basic frame. All right, then we're going to go into those specifics. This piece here that goes into the seat tube that the seat attaches to is called the seat post. The seat, really, we should refer to it as a saddle. I'll try to say saddle, but occasionally I'll say seat. And why, people ask, well, if it's called a saddle, then why do they call it a seat tube? I don't know, but that's called a saddle. We've got your crank, all right? This entire thing is called the crank set. You have a crank arm. Chain rings are where the teeth are. Those are called chain rings. And the pedal. Up here in the front, this is the stem that comes out of the fork and it attaches to the handlebars. Handlebars, brake levers. You can see those. And then the shifters, if you have shifters, would be there around the brake levers. Unless you have an older style bike that might have shifters down here, or you might have shifters here on the stem. Let's move back here to the back. This piece here that the chain rolls through and actually does the shifting is called a derailleur. That's the rear derailleur because it moves the chain and puts it and deposits it on the different cogs. This piece here that's attached to the seat tube that the chain runs through, that's called the front derailleur. It moves the chain and positions it on one of the chain rings. Okay. When I talk about a wheel, okay, the entire assembly here, all parts included, is what would be considered a wheel. All right, but each one of these parts has a separate name. The silver hoop that the tire is attached to, aluminum or steel, whatever the material is called the rim. The center part where it spins around, that the axle goes through, that's called the hub. And then each of these spokes that comes out from the hub and attaches to the rim is actually attached to the rim using the nipples. Right? So each spoke goes into a nipple, and the nipple is attached or rests in the rim. But the entire assembly is what would be called a wheel. All right, and then the chain. We'll get into chains a little bit more in depth later. The brake levers we talked about. The brake levers will operate the brake. Whether it's a caliper or a brake arm, depending on what style brake it is, you will have two brake levers, or if you have two brake levers, then you typically have two brakes, a front and a rear. If you only have one brake lever, it may be on the front or the rear. Yeah, so that's it. That's the parts of the bike. Let's move on from there. Let's talk about bike types, right? So everybody has something different probably, and I don't want to leave anything out. So I like to think of bike types that there's like 5 main bike types that you could categorize pretty much at, well, let's maybe say 6, but so a hybrid bike would be a flat bar, pretty much, bigger tires or bigger circumference or diameter, but skinny. So hybrid, you have a mountain bike. This would be an older style mountain bike, kind of beefy tires, usually have some sort of tread, some sort of knobby tread on them. You'd have, again, flat bars, big tires, knobby tread would be a mountain bike. You'd have a road bike. Road bike would be bigger diameter, very skinny tires, what we call drop bars, meaning the handlebars that kind of look like a ram's horn that kind of come down. That would be a road bike. You'd have gravel bikes that are a big category right now. They are kind of a cross between a road bike and a mountain bike. They look like a road bike with big kind of knobbier tires on them. You have cruiser bikes. Cruiser bikes typically just one, maybe a couple gears. They very upright seating position, swept back handlebars, very comfortable. And then I guess the last kind would just be like BMX, just smaller wheel diameter, one gear. So those are our basic bike types. All right, and then we'll go into some bicycle tools. Now, everyone needs to know that every fastener on a bicycle is a metric fastener. So if you're going to do any work on a bicycle, you'll want to have some sort of a metric tool. There are a few bike-specific tools that you don't have to have, but you might need in order to perform some sort of task. One tool you might need here is like this is a 15 millimeter pedal wrench. It is very, very thin in order to get between the crank arm and the pedal. If anybody's ever tried to take a set of pedals off using just your standard adjustable wrench, you just can't get the head of that wrench in there to really get much purchase. So that's why they make pedal wrenches. They're very thin. 15 millimeters is the typical size of a pedal wrench or of a pedal. 15 millimeter combination wrench. If you have a bicycle with bolt-on axles, front or rear, typically those bolts on those axles are 15 millimeter bolts. So if you need to take wheels off, you may need a 15 millimeter, or an adjustable wrench will work in those situations because you got enough room to get around them. Hex wrenches. I have a set of just basic hex wrenches. You can also call them Allen wrenches. All right, if you can see these, you get a bad backdrop. 6 millimeter, 5 millimeter, 4 millimeter, very standard sizes. If you buy any kind of a bicycle multi-tool, they will have hex wrenches. 4, 5, and 6 are the typical sizes, and maybe a flathead screwdriver or a Phillips screwdriver. That's a very basic bicycle multi-tool. Or you can get into a variety of more complicated bicycle multi-tools that have all sorts of little attachments and chain breaker tools and whatnot. But for your basic stuff, you don't really need all of that. You can get away with a lot of just home tools as long as you know that they're metric. Hex wrenches, a pedal wrench. Last little set of specific bike tools I want to show you are these. You can see what I'm holding here. This is called a tire lever. I'm going to get a little more in depth with tire levers here in a bit, so I'll show you these more specifically with a better camera here in a little bit later. But You might want to get some tire levers to deal with your tires or tubes.
Mark, can I jump in?
Yeah.
So one thing, and if having access to tools is an issue or anything like that, there are a lot more, like outside of the Johnson County Library, there are those fix-it stands now that have a lot of those basic bike tools and even bike pumps. If say you don't have those tools at home, so that's an extra resource if say you don't have them, but not a bad idea to just get yourself a multi-tool and some of the basic stuff.
Yeah, if you're gonna take on riding at any kind of not advanced level, but if you're not just running around the block, once or twice a week, if you're going to start riding, 5 or 10 miles every several days, it'd be worth it for you to have a basic set of bike tools.
For sure. Okay.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions about what I just went over? Those are the basics just to get started.
I'm not seeing anything yet, but feel free to ask in the Q&A feature, but we can go ahead and move along.
All right, let's get into the meat of this then. So this program is Maintain Your Ride. So I'm going to give you the basics on how to take care of your bike and make sure it's functioning properly. So diagnosing problems is kind of it's the first step, right? You need to know what needs to be done. We have a method that we teach in all of our programs, whether it's to the youth or to our young adults or into our adult programs. We have a method that we use to check our bikes. We do it, we teach every time we ride our bike, we should be using this. And it's called the ABC Quick Check. 5 parts to it. And we can break down the bicycle into those 5 parts, or actually we can break down everything into 5 parts. So A would be anything dealing with air. So we're talking about the tires, we're talking about the tubes, kind of talking about the wheels, So we're gonna go through A. I'm gonna teach you about tires and tubes, and I'm gonna teach you about how to change a flat. We're going to talk about B, would be for brakes, anything to do with the brakes. I'm going to show you how to check the brakes, and I'm going to show you how to go a little deeper in on those. C would be for chain, anything to do with the chain or the drivetrain. I'll show you a little bit on how to maintain your chain, and I'll try to do my best remotely to show you how to do some adjustment of your shifting. So A, B, C. Quick is with the quick releases. So quick releases will be maybe on your wheels, front and rear wheel, and maybe on your seat post. And I want to show you a little bit about quick releases. There's a few kind of pitfalls there in a quick release. And then check is check yourself. We say check yourself before you wreck yourself. I'm not going to get into the check yourself part, but that has to do with wearing a helmet if you have it, how to put it on properly, make sure there's nothing else that's going to cause you to crash that you can control on yourself. So let me give you a demonstration on how to do the ABC Quick Check real quick. Take this bike out of the stand. See if I can get behind it. All right. ABC Quick Check. So the way we teach it is that for your tires, you should be able to just check the pressure in your tires just real quickly, and you should be able to squeeze them. If you have a mountain bike or a hybrid or anything that has some volume to the tire, you should be able to squeeze it and feel if it's flat or properly inflated or inflated good enough. If you have a road bike, you probably need a pressure gauge to see what your pressure is, but you'll be able to tell if it's flat or not just by checking. So we just say squeeze the tires, make sure they're inflated properly. They should feel firm like a basketball. And then it's not a bad idea just to spin that wheel around. I don't know if you can see that. Just spin the wheel around, see everything looks spinning correctly. Okay. B, the way we say to check for brakes is we just grab both of our brake levers and we just rock the bike back and forth. Now, if the brakes are working, then those wheels will not roll as I lift that the opposite side up. Real quick way to know if your brakes are working. I like both of my brake levers to pull the same amount, if that makes any sense. I don't want one brake lever to be really touchy, like barely pull it and it's engaging, and the other one to be like pulling all the way to the handlebar. I like them to be even. Your brake lever should never pull all the way to the handlebar. It should engage somewhere, I don't know, halfway or 2/3 of the way, and then it should never bottom out at the bar. So those are A, B, C. So checking the chain, the way we teach it, and you may not be able to see it in this video the way I have my camera laid out, is we just say to spin the pedals backwards and listen to the chain go through the system. Look at it and make sure that everything is operating as it should. You'll know pretty quickly if something is out of place. If I shift my bike right now without pedaling and I go ahead and pedal backwards, it's going to make a heck of a racket, and that's not good. So I should maybe pedal forward and see. So the chain makes noise as you're pedaling backwards. Something needs to be dealt with before you just jump on it and start powering down the road. Okay. The quick release. I guess I can get into, no, I'll get into quick release later. Let me get this thing out of the way. All right, let's go in. Yeah.
If I could jump in, as far as our poll results for how confident do you feel about fixing a flat on your bicycle, it looks like we only have 2 pros, so most everyone could use a refresher, so that's good.
Good. All right, so let's take this tire out, this wheel out here. Yeah, and this is still the best place for me to do this, right? Okay. So before I deflate this, let me see if I can give you guys some knowledge on how to know what size tire you have. So if you have a flat, and if you need a new tube or a new tire, you're going to need to know what you're looking for. When you go to a bike shop or somewhere to buy a new tube, you're going to need to know a few things. First thing you're going to need to know, Suzanne, do you have that graphic of the valves?
I do. Yeah, let me figure out how to share my screen again. Sorry. Okay. Yes. So in this, I don't know if can you see that parts of a bicycle there?
That's parts of a bicycle.
Cool. So, and I'll share this slideshow with you all too. That's the course outline. Okay, different valves.
Okay. So there's 2 different valves that you will find on a bicycle or a bicycle tube. Presta and Schrader. Schrader is the same valve that you'd find on your car tire. It's basically the exact same valve. Typically you'll find Schrader valves, I say typically, on more entry-level bikes now, or older like mountain bikes. Think of a bicycle that had kind of a wider rim to it. There'd be more space to have a bigger hole for a bigger diameter valve. Okay, so when they started getting into narrower rims for skinnier tires, they needed to find a different valve standard that didn't take as much, create as big a hole in the rim. So they came up with Presta. Presta is, and I don't know that this picture is to scale. I think that Presta valve is smaller than that.
Actually. I don't know that. I didn't know you wanted it to scale.
No. I never thought about that, but as I look at it here, those look like they're the same size.
Yeah, no, in reality, they're skinnier for sure.
Yeah. The Presta valve could fit inside the Schrader valve. Okay, but they theoretically operate the same. The Schrader valve, everyone's familiar with it. That has a little pin, a little spring-loaded pin inside, and when you push down on the pin, the air comes out. The Presta valve has the exact same valve setup, except it has this little screwed-on kind of cap on the very top of it. If you look at this image, it has that little, there's a little, I call it knurled. There's a little knurled part of metal there right above the threads, and that screws open to allow you to push down on the pin, because there's no protection like on the Schrader valve protecting the pin from being depressed by mistake. So you have to open, unthread that thing, or kind of screw it back down to keep the pin from pushing. Anyway, so when you're dealing with tubes, you need to know, first thing is valve. What kind of valve do you have? Do you have Schrader or do you have Presta? This wheel that I'm going to, sorry, everything's backwards. This has a Schrader valve, if you can see on this. Suzanne, can you go to my other screen here? It's a little bit better for this visual.
Did it work?
Nope.
Really?
I don't think so. There we go.
Sorry.
All right, no worries. Let me adjust this so you guys don't have to look at me. You get to look at the parts of the bike. All right. So here's this little wheel that I've got the Schrader valve. A couple pieces of information you also need to know. Printed on the outside, either printed or stamped on the outside of every tire, will be a size. Okay. This is 26 by 2.0. Now what that means is 26 is the diameter of this tire. 2.0 is the width. This is 2 inches wide by 26 inches in diameter. All right, so this tire is a 26 by 2.0. So inside of here will be a tube that should fit that range. It'll be a 26 by something, 2.0 will fit in the range, and it's a Schrader valve. So let me take all the air out of this tube, and I'm going to show you how to, I should have had this done while all right. So as I'm letting this out, talk about tire levers. As a kid growing up, I can remember being taught to use a flathead screwdriver. Get a big or two big flathead screwdrivers out of my dad's toolbox, and then I'd jam these pointy pieces of steel inside of my tire where there's delicate rubber in there, and I'm supposed to expect that everything's going to go well. Well, typically it always didn't. So here's a tire lever. Tire lever has two ends to it, two specifically different shaped with different purposes. You have this end that I call the spoon end. It's kind of nice and smooth, a little bit rounded, all right? You got the spoon end, and then you have the hook end, all right? So if you have a flat tire and you want to get this tire off, you may need 2 tire levers. Rarely do you need 3. I don't know why I have a cluster of 3 here with me. But first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my spoon end and I'm going to stick it underneath the tire, and I'm going to pry that tire out a little bit, and then I'm going to hook the hook on a spoke. And you can see that there's a little bit of a gap between the tire and the rim now. I'll take my second tire lever, spoon end, I'll stick it in that little gap that's left, and I should be able to pull it towards me and pry the tire off of the rim. Just like that. Now that tire is off the rim, just on one side though. All I'm trying to do is pull this tube out. I'm not trying to take the tire completely off the rim. There's really no reason to take the tire off yet. So now what I'll do is I'll just kind of work my way until I can get that tube and pull the tube out of the valve hole, and here's my tube. Now we talked about tires having information printed or stamped on them, so you know what size they are. Tubes will have the same thing. Tubes will have stuff printed or stamped on them, so you know what size they are. This is a 26 by 1.9 to 2.125. So this tube will fit any tire that's in that range. And as you recall, our tire was a 2.0. So this tube is perfect for this tire. Okay? All right. So let's just imagine that we've got ourselves a new tube. And now we're going to install it. You guys see this little rubber stuff hanging off my tire. You can pull that off. It's fine. It's just extra rubber that has finally found its way loose. All right. So where I start with my tubes, I take my valve and I find the hole in the rim right there, and I stick the valve into the valve hole. And then I will pull that tire kind of away from the rim, and I'll tuck the tube up into the tire. Now what you may have seen here, this is kind of a trick, and I apologize, so I'm just going to clarify this before you guys find yourself in this situation. This tube has some shape to it because there's still a little bit of air left in it, right? If you were to go buy a brand new tube and pull it out of a box, it would be like a vacuum. It would be free of any air, so it would be flat. It might be beneficial to hit that tube with a couple shots of air from a pump just to give it some body before you install the tube. All right, it might help. All right, tube's inside the tire, but the tire is still not on the rim. I hope you guys can see that. Okay, next tip I'm going to give you. You'll notice here's the valve. You'll notice that the label of the tire, I have lined it up with the valve. Now, yes, I have some OCD issues, but this has a purpose. So if I line up my tire with my valve stem, I now have given myself a reference point to where if I find a hole in this tube right here, then I know that that hole is going to be right there in this tire, because I know that that's where the tire was lined up with the tube. If you just put your tires on in a random way and then you get a hole in the tube, you're going to have to search the entire tire to find that hole. Instead of, if you line it up, you basically have either here or here, depending on which way that tube was inserted. I hope that makes sense. Plus it looks pro. But okay, last thing before I close this thing up. If you had a hole in your tube and you believe it was caused by maybe a puncture, something, wait, I'm looking down here, sorry. Something poked through your tire, be it a piece of glass or a thorn or something, you may want to check your tire before you go ahead and put a brand new tube in there, seal it all up, inflate it, and then puncture your brand new tube. So if you know what kind of punctured it, or if you can see what the hole in the tube looked like, you might feel around on the inside of that tire carefully. If it's a piece of glass, it might cut you. So just inspect the inside of the tire, find the obstruction, and remove it before you put a brand new tube in. Okay.
Also, if I could jump in, I'm all about getting new tubes, but it's not a bad idea to also maybe learn how to patch on your spare time. There are like videos that teach how to do that, and it's a good skill to know how to do. We won't teach that here, but if you're worried about, how much does a new tube cost now? I think it's like $7 or $8.
$10.
Yeah, and you can get a patch kit for $3 that has a ton of patches, and I know that it's a little bit more of a process, but not a bad skill to learn, and definitely something that might be fun to do at home after your ride to try, but not practice perfecting it on the side of the road when you're all stressed out and your friends are waiting for you. You know what I mean? So maybe taking that old tube home and then trying to patch it. It would be a fun exercise.
That's what I do. So whenever I go for a ride, I will take a new tube with me. If I get a flat, I'll put a new tube in. I'll take my old tube, I'll fold it up, put it back in my little bag, and I'll bring it home, and I will patch that tube, and then save it. And reason I don't demonstrate patching is because I swear if I get on camera putting a patch on, it will never work. But I can make all of my patches here at home work. But when people are watching me, for whatever reason, it doesn't work. They sell these little self-adhesive patches. I don't know if you can see what this is, a little park tool. They're little squares. They're self-adhesive. These are emergency patches. What I mean by that is they are not a permanent repair. They will get you home. They're quick. You can just take that tube out, find the hole, take this thing, peel the backer off, stick it on the tube, put it back in your tire, pump it up, and get moving. But they are not permanent. They will let go. These tubes are vulcanizing. So if you use do I have that upside down? Sorry. If you use the cement in here and you follow the instructions correctly, this tube is a permanent repair. I mean, this patch is a permanent repair to that tube. So understand the difference between the self-adhesive and the vulcanizing patches. All right, this is how you put the tire back on. I like to start up here at the valve, both hands on both sides, and I like to work that bead of that tire back on, going around, and then I get to a point right here where I need to use my tire levers. So spoon end again, but I'm going to go backwards this time. I'm going to stick it underneath that tube, underneath the tire, and then I'm going to pry the tire. You might need to start here and then come over here. Take a little bit of work. There. Hope you guys could see that. So last thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to make sure that I don't have that tube pinched underneath the bead of the tire before I go ahead and inflate. All right, great. Now, speaking of inflation, not financial inflation, but inflation of a tire. Another thing that is stamped or printed on the outside of every tire is some inflation recommendations. Let's see, can you guys see that? I can't see what you can see. I'm pretty well blind anymore.
It's pretty, I mean, like you can kind of see it, but look for the number before PSI.
Okay. So on every tire should be printed or stamped the inflation recommendations for that tire. And this tire here says inflate to 35 to 65 PSI. Okay. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that everybody should inflate it to 65 PSI because that's the max on here? The answer is no, but sadly, most cyclists think, well, I'm going to pump it up to the max because I should do everything to the max. I'm going to suggest that you kind of identify yourself as being a very petite person, or maybe a large person, or maybe a medium person. And then you should pick either the low end of that range or the high end of that range, or maybe in the middle of that range, if that makes any sense. If I am a 75-pound, kid, then there's no reason that this tire should be pumped up to 65 PSI. You can get away with 35 or 40 PSI and be just fine and super comfortable. If you are a heavier person, you might want to be towards the higher end of that, 60, maybe 65, just so that when you are on it, you are not pushing down on it and what we call bottoming out on anything, right? But if you're of average weight, you can probably get away with 50 PSI on here, maybe 55, and be super comfortable, no problems. So just figure that out. You do not need to pump everything up to the max on your tires if you are not. You just got to determine whether you need that or not. Okay, so pumping. I'll show you a few pumping techniques, all right? Or not techniques, but options. So this is just a floor pump, right? Not everybody has one, but if you have one, that's great. The head of this, you will stick it onto the valve, and then you'll open that lever to secure it onto the valve, all right? I guess old pumps used to be the opposite. Like you'd stick it on and then you'd close it to attach it to the valve. Not sure why they would change that up. But anyway, I'm gonna put it on the valve, open that lever, and then I can put air in it, okay? I'm not gonna do that, and then close that lever and pull it off. A couple other pump examples that you might have. Anybody have these hand pumps that they strap to the side of their bike? Little emergency hand pump. You pull that little handle open. Same situation with the lever here to attach it to the valve and close it. These are handy to have. If I can make a recommendation, just for your enjoyment of riding, if you're going to get a little hand pump like this, get something that's more like this. And the reason I say it, all right, is because as you pump this thing, you're like, well, how do you attach it to the bicycle? Right here is a little flexible tube. Now, the beauty of this flexible tube is that you attach this to your valve, and then as you're pumping, this takes all of the jerky motion of jamming this thing against your valve the whole time you're pumping it up. And anybody who's used one of these things out on the road, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're jamming this thing sideways and you're going to break off that valve. It'll happen eventually.
Oh yeah, and Presta valves are very sensitive. If they get bent, then
right.
You could get a slow leak.
And if you can picture this, you're going to stick this thing on this valve like this, and then you're going to jam this thing sideways a whole bunch of times to fill it up. And that little valve is only going to last so long with so many being pushed sideways. So if you're going to buy a little mini pump, you get one with this little rubber hose, and then that hose will flex and you won't bust your valve off. All right? So just think about that. If you're going to invest a little bit of money, get one that has that little hose and then folds up into a nice little package. It'll make your life easier at some point, I promise you.
And if I could jump into on just the pump thing, if you are doing like the going to a gas station and using those air compressors there, I mean, in a pinch, but those inflate really quickly. And so I really advise against using those, but I understand sometimes you have to in a pinch. But yeah, definitely using a floor pump is way better than using those, the ones you use at gas stations.
Yeah, when you fill your tire up too full with those gas station pumps, you'll know. and everybody at the gas station will know you did it too.
And then you'll be fixing a flat again.
Okay, so that's everything I have for the A in the ABC Quick Check about tire, size, tubes, pressure, fixing a flat, and how to use tire levers. Everybody good with that?
We haven't had any questions yet, and I mean, I really encourage you, if you have questions, please don't be shy. But yeah, just keep rolling, Mark.
All right, let's go into brakes. Let's talk about checking your brakes. Now, I showed you in the ABC Quick Check demonstration how to see if your brakes are working. So now I'm going to show you what to look for when you're actually going to maybe check your brake. Actually looking at the brakes instead of just seeing if they're working or not. So brakes are going to be, let's talk about, we can keep it on this screen. This is a set of what we call V brakes. They would be attached to each leg of the fork or each side of the seat stay. And as you pulled on the brake lever, it would make these things tip together, and then these brake pads, which should be twisted better, would squeeze on the rim. Okay, does that make sense? Good. These are called V brakes, and they have pads on them. This here is more of a road style brake. Okay, similar setup. You have two pads that when things are squeezed together, they will pinch the rim like that. Okay, the cable would go from here up through here and around like this. Here's my little brake lever demonstration. So as I pull the brake lever, those pinch together. Okay, what you're checking for there is your pads. You want to make sure that your pads still have life to them. And I'm trying to find my demonstration pads here. Here we go. Here's a pad that has, it's pretty well worn. And you're like, how do I know that it's pretty well worn? Well, it does not have the grooves in it. You'll see that those grooves, this is a brand new pad, okay? So those are like wear indicator grooves. They're also kind of relief cuts. They allow the debris to kind of collect inside of that cut. So as the brake pad wears, any of the dust will collect inside of that cut instead of continuing to be like pushed against the rim. But when those relief cuts disappear, then that pad is pretty well worn and trashed. Okay, so watch those relief cuts. When those things disappear and you don't see them anymore, it's time to replace your pads. Here's another example of a pad problem. This pad here still has some relief cuts, but if you look closely, you'll see all the little shiny stuff embedded in that brake pad. So those are little pieces of metal or other kind of debris. And every time you engage your brakes and you shove this pad against your rim, you're going to continue to force that debris into your metal rim, and then you'll score that rim or put a nice gouge or groove in it, and you'll damage your rim. So if you see any debris in your brake pads like that, very simple. What you'll do is just take some sort of a pick or some sort of a sharp object. There's a little dental pick type thing, and you just pick that out of there. I'm not going to do it because it's my demonstrator pad. If I pick it out of there, then I won't have any. But you just pick all that metal out of that brake pad, maybe hit it with a little sandpaper just to kind of smooth it out a little bit, and then that brake pad will be good as long as it still has the relief cuts. Okay, let's see. Here's the difference between, this is kind of a post style brake pad. I gotta make sure I'm at the right level. Sorry, guys. the brake pad and the metal post that attaches to the actual brake caliper are fused together. So when you have to replace this brake pad, you have to replace this entire assembly. So you just go get a new one of this entire thing and then reattach it, putting all of your little spacers exactly where they were in the original one back. This is a style of brake that has removable kind of cartridge style brake pad. All right, this is kind of a road brake. And what you would do is you can do this while I'm talking. You can push this brake pad. Of course, it's being difficult with me right now. If you can see, this thing is wanting to back out. There we go. Come on now. There we go. Brake pad and the cartridge, they separate. So this thing will stay attached to your brake caliper. This is a better example. Here's your brake caliper. The silver things are those cartridges. So they stay exactly where they are. And all you do is remove the rubber brake pad, slide a new one in, tighten that little screw, you're good to go. It's a very quick replacement. And you don't have to do any readjustment of the position of the brake pad. It's so much better if you can switch from a post style to a cartridge style brake pad. And here is one of those long ones. Here's a long cartridge style brake pad. So you can replace brake pads with these cartridge style. They will make your life easier going forward because you can just remove the brake pads themselves very easy. All right, does anybody have a disc brake bike? Don't know if anybody said anything, but it's all right. We're going to talk about disc brakes real quick.
You have one hand up. I'll raise my hand too.
Okay.
Oh, two hands up.
Okay. So disc brakes. Disc brakes are becoming more and more common in our bike world, and the similar concept, better brake feel, better brake power. They're better in foul weather. There's lots and lots of benefits of disc brakes, but they do come with their own unique set of challenges and things to be careful of, okay? This is a set of brake pads for a disc brake. Disc brakes are very much like an automotive or a motorcycle disc brake, just on a very much smaller scale. You'll have two individual pads. These have a little spring between them, okay? And here's an example of a disc brake rotor, okay? You can see the two pads are in there, all right? Separated with just enough space for the disc, for the rotor to run through. And as you engage your brakes, they squeeze together, okay? So the question is, how do I know when my disc brake pads are shot? Well, there are specific thickness requirements for each brake pad that's out there, and I can't necessarily get into all of them. But what I would say is that if the little fingers of that spring are touching your rotor, so if your brake pad material has gotten lower than the thickness of those little fingers, your brake pads are shot. I hope that kind of makes sense. If you can see that. The little fingers are still hidden behind the pad material. But when the pad material gets worn down far enough that those little fingers of that spring start touching the rotor, you'll know. And it's time to change. Get that later. This is a disc brake rotor, okay? Obviously two-sided because it's going to be clamped by both sides, all right? Disc brake rotors are different sizes. They will have, let me find the size on here so I don't show it to you upside down. I think the size is right there, 160, or does that say 180? 180. That says 180. Okay. So you want to make sure you, if you're replacing rotors, you get the right size rotor, and you typically want to get the same. I know you can mix and match rotors if you want, but I wouldn't suggest it unless you really know what you're doing. Replace a rotor that you just took off for the exact same rotor. When it comes to disc brakes, don't touch the rotor with your hands. Even though, you know, I'm doing a demonstration, I'm still not touching the rotor with my hand. You'll see I'm grabbing the spider here instead of the actual rotor surface. These rotors do not like oil on them. What they'll do is they'll take that oil and they'll transfer them into the brake pad, and then the brake pad won't grab, and then you'll have a rotor that either doesn't stop well, or it howls or screams or makes all kinds of noises that your friends won't want to ride around you if your bike makes that noise. So don't touch the brake surface. Try to keep any kind of contaminants, any kind of chain lube or any kind of cleaners or anything like that. Keep that away from your disc brake setup at all. I almost like at all costs. Like, keep them clean. Okay, brakes. Good. Let's talk about, sorry, thought I was prepared. Let's talk about adjustments for brakes. If you have a brake setup that has a flat bar lever like this, okay, the way you adjust your brake to make it a little tighter or a little looser, or more loose, I apologize, is this little thing here on the end is called the barrel adjuster. Now, if I twist this, you'll see it start to get longer. If you make it longer like that, and then this is just a lock nut is all that is, it just prevents it from spinning back in. I have just, you've made it tighter. You've given yourself less of a lever pull. Okay, so if you're pulling your lever and it's going all the way to the handlebars, you might want to just thread this out a little bit, give it another pull, see if that does anything for you. Okay, you can adjust the tension or the lever pull based on this barrel adjuster, but then put your lock nut back so it doesn't go on its own. If you have a road style brake like this, here's your barrel adjuster right here on top. You can thread it out, lock nut down, just made your brake tighter. I think I can demonstrate that exactly on this setup because it has a cable in it. So if I'm gonna bang the laptop here. If I start to adjust, let's see. Sorry, imagine that we're looking at it the right way. If I adjust this, I don't know if you guys can see that that's getting tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter and closer together. Maybe you can't. Anyway, it did. It got closer together. That's how you adjust the lever. Okay, look at how close those pads come together now, whereas if it was threaded all the way in, so I just added almost a 1/4 inch. Okay, great. Now, on a disc brake, you'd probably be using the barrel adjuster on the handle to operate a disc brake caliper. Okay, there we go. That's how we add tension to brakes. Any questions on brakes?
I'm not seeing anything yet, but yeah, I was just going to say about the barrel adjuster. That's a really good way to do an adjustment. I mean, you can mess with the cable there, but every time you loosen and tighten on a cable, it kind of ruins the integrity of that cable, and then you might have to replace the whole thing. So really, your barrel adjusters are your friends. in those situations. We are coming up on the 1 o'clock. It's been an hour, so we still have a little bit to cover if you can stay on, but if you do have to go, totally understandable. But yeah, Mark, I guess if enough people stay on, I think we should just keep going with the program.
Cool. Let's jump into the C part of the ABC Quick Check, and we're going to jump into our chain. I really want, if you guys can hang on, I really want you to know about your chain. We're getting close. Okay. Here's my chain demonstration. Actually, Suzanne, throw up that graphic of chain parts.
Do you see it?
Yep, I see it. All right, so chain parts. So when we're talking about a chain and maintaining a chain and keeping it clean and keeping it lubricated, I want you to understand what we're trying to keep clean and what we're trying to keep lubricated. Too many people get hung up with what they see on a chain, which are the outer plates, which would be letter A and letter B. Those are the outer plates of a chain. They're the shiny parts that you see. And two people get hung up, but they want to make sure that those are very well coated in whatever kind of lubricant they're going to use. In reality, those outer plates should be nearly the cleanest part of the chain. Like, I don't want anything on them. I want them to be free of any oil or grease or anything. So what we want to be lubricated on a chain, letters D, well, I guess it's letters D, those are the rollers, okay? And those rollers spin around. If you see right below them and right above them in letter B, the little protrusions here, those rollers spin around those little flanges, I guess I would call them, on the inner plate. All right. If you look just to the right of the letter A is the above view of an inner plate assembled with the rollers in place. Those rollers spin on the flanges of the inner plate. That is the only place that really needs to be lubricated, because those are the only parts that move. Now, the outer plates should be clean. The letter C in this diagram, that's the pin. The pin is like, it's fused in there, it's pressed in there. It does not spin at all. And the rollers don't spin on the pin. The inner plates kind of rotate on the pin. So there's a little bit of need for lubrication in that area, but that's really it. So, okay, go ahead and bring it back to me on my small, that's it. Okay, so here is a chain that I have. It's not completely nasty. I'm holding it. I'm not getting all greasy using it yet. So that's the side view. That's what everybody sees. Outer plates and then inner plates are just the parts you can barely see there. Okay, but if I tip it sideways, you'll see the rollers on the very inside. You'll see the inner plates and you'll see the outer plates. Okay, and as you bend the chain, right, that's everything's nice and free. Now, how do we check a chain? This chain here, I don't know if you can tell, but I am holding it sideways, okay? Holding it sideways, and I'm able to almost bend it into a U. Now, is that good or is that bad? That is bad. You should not be able to take a chain sideways and bend it in a U like that. And I'm not even like forcing it. This has been worn out so much that the plates are, there's wiggle, there's absolute kind of play in between all that. so the chain is able to flex around. Okay, that's a good way to check your chain. If you have the ability to just flop it around like that, that chain is worn pretty well. There's other ways to check a chain. There are chain checkers that check the specific distance between pins. Stick that hook in there, and if that finger went right in there, and it should not at all. And that's like let's flip it around to the other side, which is the worst measurement. It doesn't go in that bad, but the chain is so sloppy, it's bad. Okay, so you can also check it with a very good tape measure, very good ruler. 12 inches exactly should land on one pin to another pin. So if you had a very good ruler, you could put it on one pin, doesn't matter which one, and exactly 12 inches later will fall exactly on the center of another pin. Now, why are all fasteners on bikes metric, but chains are measured in
Mark,
standard?
one question I get a lot that I always have a hard time answering, people want to know, like, how often how many miles can you get out of a chain? And I never really know that. I mean,
you should be able to get several thousand miles out of a chain. Okay.
that's normally
What's that?
I'm like, you can get like a couple thousand, but I mean, I think people want to know more of, like, it's almost like it's like your transmission. They want to know, like, what you can get out of it.
Well, but it depends on how you use it, right? So you could, if you misuse a chain, and which we'll get into later when we talk about shifting and the way you work your gears, the way you use your gearing will absolutely affect your chain, because it's your chain that has to deal with what you're forcing it to do. So if you shift gears properly, that will prolong the life of your chain. If you clean your chain and lube your chain often, that will prolong the life of your chain.
And if I could also jump in, I mean, checking your chain and keeping up on your chain is really important, because if you wait too long, it all wears down as a unit, and that can become a really expensive repair, where you have to replace not only your chain, but you have to replace, the back area where all the gears are, which is called either the freewheel or the cassette, and sometimes even the front chain rings too, if it's all been worn down, because it's all kind of a unit. So really replacing your chain regularly is a way less expensive thing to do than waiting for it all to wear down.
Yeah, because the cogs back here in the freewheel or the cassette, depending on what it is, they're a wear item. And if you keep running a worn out elongated chain through there, those things will eventually wear out also. You have to replace that. Or your chain rings. If you keep a good chain on there, the chain rings and the cassette, they'll pretty much go a long time without getting worn out. All right, let's talk about chain lube real quick. There are bicycle specific chain lubes. There's lots and lots of them out there. Couple different types that you'll hear about is the wet lube or a dry lube. And just real quick, if you are going to ride in wet conditions, sloppy conditions, if there's going to be times where mud or water is going to get on your chain, then you should use a wet lube, because it will shed that debris easier. If you're going to ride in perfect conditions all the time, like you will never see water or rain or mud, then use a dry lube. It's not going to be as greasy, and it'll be a little bit cleaner and a little bit less friction, I guess, in the system. So you just have to decide. Okay. These are a couple different options I use. This is like my favorite wet lube, this ProLink, and then this is my personal favorite dry lube, this Rock and Roll Gold. So I'm going to show you how to put lube on a chain. The theoretical way to do this is you're supposed to
put a drop of oil at every, on every roller, right? So on every, like, just think about every pin, where every pin location is on a chain. You would want to put a drop of lube on top of every roller. Boom, 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 right? So there's like 120 links in a chain. So go ahead and keep track of which one you started on and which one you ended on. And if you guys can get that right, then you tell me what system you use, because I can never figure, I get lost. So what I typically do is I will take and I will just lightly drip lube on my chain as I roll the chain through the system, very lightly. And yeah, I'll do multiple. I'll hit multiple chain links a couple times, right? And that's okay. The key to putting lube on a chain is not the application, it's the removal of the excess. So again, what I want to do, and I apologize for getting in the way, is I will run that chain through the system. I'll shift the gears a couple times, really work that into the chain. All right, good. Then I'll take just a nasty old rag that I don't care about, and I will wipe off all the excess. Now, trust me when I say this, that the lube that you need on your chain has gotten where it needs to be. What you just took off was pure excess that you don't want on there. Okay, get the lube down into the rollers, not out on the surface. So whatever you apply, work it through, wipe off all the excess, and you'll be happy going forward. If you don't wipe off that excess, it will just continue to grow and balloon because it's all on the outside of the chain, and then your chain will turn black, and then everything around it will turn black, and then if you touch it, whatever you touch it with will turn black. It will happen. I don't care what kind of lube you use, but if you apply it and then wipe it all off, it's a much better application. Okay, and then if you are going to switch between different kinds of chain lube, you need to clean that chain pretty extensively. You can use that with just some mild dish soap or a mild degreaser, and just some rags or whatever. Don't take a pressure washer and blast your chain off, or avoid the real kind of heavy degreaser stuff and just spraying it on there, just randomly. You don't want to get degreaser all over your bike. So I would put it on a rag and just put it directly on the chain, not everything else.
I like Simple Green too. That's kind of what my go-to cleaner.
Yeah, Simple Green's what we use in the shop. Yeah, it's good. It's not going to hurt anything else, but it'll cut the grease. Okay, that's my chain parts. Now, I sometimes get questions about, what about WD-40? What else can I use without having to buy this expensive, which I don't know if it's expensive, specific bike chain lube? WD-40 is not necessarily a lubricant. So if you don't have anything except for WD-40, I guess it's better than nothing. But it will not last. It might make that chain stop squeaking for a very short amount of time, but that's it. It's gonna be a very short amount of time. You're gonna need to reapply that. It's not really penetrating, and it's got no staying power. Heavy oil, like motor oil, it's just too thick, too sticky. It's going to cause just slow chain response. It's not good for a bicycle application. I mean, bicycle application and an automotive application are two very different things. There's very high heat and friction and RPMs in an automotive application and in a bicycle. You're just not generating the heat to break down those lubricants into being as fluid as they need to be to do what they need to do. So specific bike lubes, they're there for a reason. So,
and they're pretty inexpensive. I feel like it's worth it to get like a small bottle. It'll last you a long time. You know, they're not too expensive. Definitely something to have if you're riding a lot.
Okay, that's my chain stuff. Let's talk about, let's go into skewers real quick. My last like little soapbox thing about skewers. I really want to make sure people understand what a skewer is, how it works, and the parts of it. And I apologize if y'all think that you know all this, but I've seen too many people that don't know it and have done it wrong. Okay, skewers. These are quick release skewers. I have two of them here, and if you can tell, they're two different sizes. One is for the front wheel, one is for the rear wheel, because the rear wheel is wider than the front wheel, if you can see that. Okay, so first things first, make sure you're putting a front or a rear into the front or the rear. The rear will go into the front, but the front will never go into the rear wheel or the rear hub. Okay, that being said, let's talk about the parts of it. So you have it's not the axle. What would you call the threaded part of the skewer?
I don't
the
know.
Axle. Anyway.
Part of the skewer.
Yeah, the threaded part of the skewer is okay. Threaded on one side. This is kind of like it's fused into this end here. You got this this nut that comes off. Okay, and then you have these two springs. If you see the two springs. Okay, and they're kind of cone shaped, and they're cone shaped for a reason. And then you have this end here, which is where the quick release, where the cam action happens. If I put my finger right there, I apologize, I didn't have time to get if you can see, then when I turn that, it gets closer to my fingertip. That is what you are doing when you are closing the quick releases. You are just closing up that last little bit of space and compressing the system to hold it in either the fork or the dropout. That's what you're doing. Now, what I don't want people to do is to close their quick release by just spinning this all the way until it gets tight. Done. You didn't do anything. You just tightened it. You really need to close this in order to compress it. Otherwise, you have the ability to back out or just unscrew. Okay, so don't just tighten it by twisting it until it gets tight or what you think is tight. It's not tight enough. The other thing I want you to think about is how these little springs are aligned. They need to point in at each other. If you put one of these things on backwards, I need to find it. I gotta have a hub. This is, no, I don't have, well, I got a hub here, I guess. I'll take my own skewer off. All right. Very important. If done wrong, will cause you problems, I promise. So this is your wheel, and your wheel has the axle right here. This is what carries all of the weight of you and the bicycle, is that little axle end right there. Now, this little skewer spring is supposed to push up against the axle. But if you put it on backwards, there's the fat end. You put it on backwards, it will go over the axle. All right. And then what happens is you've now added thickness to your axle. So when you stick it into your fork, it doesn't sit where it's supposed to sit. It'll sit crooked. Okay. Now, if you've ever taken your wheel out, taken your quick release out, lost your springs, put them back in there backwards, and stuck your wheel back in and the thing sits crooked, and then your brakes rub, it's probably because that spring is on backwards. I've seen it a million times, and I'm not, I mean, I know I'm exaggerating, but I'm really not exaggerating that much. So when you put your skewer back together, make sure the pointy ends of the springs are touching each other, or the fat end of the spring goes into the inside of the cap. Should fit in there or into that, okay? Now, what happens if you're on the side of the road fixing a flat? You're beside yourself because you're trying to fix a flat, and you take your skewer out and the spring goes flying into the grass somewhere, and now you can't find it. That spring is a non-essential part. It is a convenience for you. That's all it is, or an inconvenience for you. If you lose one, forget about it. Let it go. It's not important. It does not affect the operation of the bike unless you put it in there wrong. Okay, so there's my skewer soapbox. All right. Has everybody got any questions to that, or we can go into shifting?
I don't see any questions. So yeah, it looks like shifting, and then if people have other just general questions about their bikes.
Yeah.
Actually, if you have any general questions about your bikes, now would be the time to start putting those in the Q&A or chat, I guess, because we're not getting a whole bunch. But yeah, let's just go to shifting.
All right, let's talk about shifting. So I talked about if you can shift properly, not only will it benefit you, it will extend the lifespan of your chain and your drivetrain part. All right, so Suzanne, I think you have a series of slides. If you don't, I have them printed out that I can.
It should be. Do you see them?
Good. Yeah. Perfect. All right. So what I want you to think about, if you have a bicycle that has some gears on them, in these slides, these are going to demonstrate both a front and rear gear system, okay? And that's really where what I'm concerned with is a term called cross-chaining. I want to prevent cross-chaining as much as possible. So if you only have one chain ring in the front and all you have is, 7 gears in the back or 5 gears in the back, then we're not really worried about cross-chaining because you're stuck with what you have. All right. But if you have 3 gears in the front and you have a series of gears in the back, I want you to know how to use those together and not force your chain to cross-chain. So Suzanne, scroll down 2 slides to the cross-chaining slide, right there. Okay, I think I can avoid some of this discussion just by pointing this out. So, and I know these are exaggerated a little bit, but they're not too far off. So if you look down when you're riding your bicycle and you look down, your front gears, we refer to them as small, middle, or big chain rings, all right? So your small chain ring, that number 1 that's shaded in blue, that's your lowest gear. That's your easiest gear, all right? So if we'll get into when you would use that. That's your lowest gear, your easiest gear. In the back is your rear gears, your cassette or your chain or your freewheel. Your biggest gear, the largest cog, is your easiest gear. Okay, so in this example, there on the bottom on the right side, you can see number 1. It's shaded in blue. All right, and number 1, if it would coincide with number 1 in the front, you'd be in your lowest front gear, your lowest back gear, that would be your lowest combination. All right. Scroll back up to that, and that's it right there.
Oh.
Next one. Next one. Yep. Okay. So these are our low gear combinations, if you understand. All right. So small chain ring in the front, and then, you know, the first 4 cogs in the back, the 4 largest in the back. If you want to go, if you're going low gear, if you need to climb up a hill or something, you'd want to use those gears. And then if you stayed in that combination, your chain would be pretty straight, if you can see that. Okay. Scroll down, Suzanne, to that last gear combination slide. It's the green ones. There we go. Yeah, so if you're in the middle chain ring, then you can keep your chain pretty well straight and use like the middle, the meat of your cassette or your chain or your freewheel in the back, if you can see that. You're never going to be in your lowest gear in the back. You're really not going to be in the highest gear in the back. But for most of your day-to-day riding, anything kind of just tooling around, that's kind of where you should be. Middle chain ring, and then you can use what they got shaded there, 5 gears in there, and you're going to keep your chain pretty well straight. Or go up to that, the red, the high gear stuff, Suzanne. Next one. There we go. Yeah. Or if you want to use your highest gears and go really fast, whatever, you got a downhill or a tailwind, then you can put it up in your big chain ring, and then you can use your smallest little cogs in the back, and those are your highest, your fastest gears. And you'd keep your chain pretty well straight. Okay. The idea is to think about where you're riding, plan ahead maybe a little bit to where you know you're going, what terrain you're going to encounter, and put yourself in the chain ring that fits that terrain. And then you can use your gears in the back that also fit that terrain and keep your chain line straight. What I see a lot of people do is, for whatever reason, maybe their front derailleur doesn't work too well. They have a hard time shifting the front. So they just leave it in one of their chain rings, whether it's the small one, the middle, or the big one. And then they use all of the gears in the back. So regularly they are cross-chaining their chain. You are just tearing up your chain. You're just stressing it. You're bending it. You're forcing it to do something that it really doesn't want to do, doesn't like to do, and you're wearing it out. So if you can't shift your front derailleur, if you can't shift those front gears, I recommend figuring out why you can't shift it and fix it, so that you can. Otherwise, you are going to be fixing other things down the road. I promise. You're going to wear out your chain, and you're going to wear out other parts because a cable was stuck or something. Okay. All right. I'm going to do my little climbing or gear terrain demonstration here, Suzanne. So you can go back to my
we
camera.
did have a question, and I was just working on a response. Let me get you back here.
Yeah, we're good.
Saying that I think it was Lane said that her gears slip in her highest and lowest. So maybe when you do your bike demo, you can kind of show why that might happen.
Gears slip in the highest and the lowest.
I feel like that could be quite a few things, and that can be kind of hard to diagnose. It could be cable tension. It could be, I need a little more information, Lane. But yeah, go ahead, Mark, with your.
All right, this is my really simple drawing of different terrain and what gear ratios you would want to use for this terrain. Okay, and it's about kind of planning ahead, because if any of you have been riding at all and you get on that hill that you just dread, it's the bane of your existence. This hill, you hate climbing it, but you want to attack it and you want to do it, and you get on it and you get halfway up, and then you realize that you just don't have the gas to get up there, and then you try to shift. You're already on this hill, so gravity's got a hold of you. And now you try to shift, And does it ever shift easily? Do good things happen when you're under load and you try to make drastic shift gear changes? The answer is probably not. So what I want you to think about is if you are on your little bicycle here and you're riding and you're on one of these red lines here, it's pretty flat, or you may be a gradual downhill, you'd be in your high gears, you know, in your big chain ring or your smallest cogs, whatever, and you're really cruising and it's fine, okay? If you're on one of these green lines, you know, our typical terrain around here, little undulations, whatever, you could probably just be in your middle chain ring, running through the meat of your cassette in the back, and be just fine, okay? If you needed a little bit lower gear, you'd have the ability to get to the low end if you need to, and you'd cross chain a little bit, but it'd be okay. Or if you had a little bit of a downhill on the backside of that little rise, you'd be okay to just, you know, spin through that also and cross chain just a little bit. All right. But if you're going to get on this blue line and you know you're going to go up a hill and you know that hill's going to be a long time, well, I would recommend to you that you just get into your low gear ahead of time. Don't attack it on the flat here, right, in your highest gears, because it's a tailwind and you're on the flat and the tailwind, you're just cruising, so you're in your high gear, and then you start climbing and you start downshifting in the back, you start dropping gears in the back to make it easier, and then you run out of the ability to drop gears in the back, and now you're like, oh crap, I need to shift my front chain ring. And you do that and either it doesn't shift or you drop a chain because now it's just, you're under load and the chains don't like to do things when you're under load. What I want you to do is think ahead, and it's okay to get into that lower gear before you start that, and maybe go into your smaller chain ring and then into one of your kind of harder gears in the back, and then you can just lose a gear as you're climbing it, and you're in a good position as you get towards the top. You still have a couple more gears to lose. So I hope you guys understand that. It's okay to ride in your middle or small chain ring, starting one of these climbs instead of staying in your big chain ring and trying to power through it all the way. Okay, that's it. That's my shifting examples. So if you can keep your chain straight as much as possible, your chain will last longer, shifting will work better, and you won't be replacing parts down the road. Okay, let me take this thing out and get my other demonstrator in there for adjustment demonstration. Has anybody got any questions?
We're still diagnosing Lane's issue, but I think what you're about to demonstrate might help with that.
Okay.
So hang with us, Lane.
And when I think of something where it shifts, it doesn't shift well in the small and the big.
She says, when I moved to either of those, the chain, because I asked her if it was the highest or lowest gear for the front or back, and it sounds like it just slips off the cassette in the back, which I think could either be cable tension or a limit screw thing. But I think your demo will really help.
Okay. Move this closer. We're about done, so I can disassemble the place a little bit here. All right, so this is my little demonstrator that I use. I can stand behind it and not block the view for y'all, and demonstrate shifting and barrel adjusters. So we talked about barrel adjusters on the brakes, on how to adjust the brake tension. There are barrel adjusters on derailleurs that do the exact same thing. Okay. I guess I should talk about limit screws first, though, right? Or what I call off-limit screws. Let's see if I can line this up. There we go. I'm going to stick that right there, and then I'm going to show you a derailleur. Okay. This is a rear derailleur. This is a road style rear derailleur. Okay, but they're all basically the same concept. All right, sorry, I'm spinning it around and get you guys dizzy. When this is installed and there's a chain running through it, God dog it. This is the back because this is a barrel adjuster. Okay. And the chain would then pull the cage down, so it would kind of sit like that. Okay, but this is the barrel adjuster. On the back side of the derailleur, if you look at it, you'll see 3 what look to be Phillips head screws. And these 2 that are usually clustered together are what they call them the limit screws. I refer to them as the off-limit screws. These should really never be adjusted unless you have made some significant change to either the cassette or the wheel is different, or there was some sort of damage to the bike that caused this derailleur to be replaced. I don't know, but as typical adjustment, because things aren't shifting correctly, these are the absolute wrong things to touch. Okay, but they're almost the first thing that anybody touches when they think that they're going to do work on their own bikes. Okay, and I say that from experience. When I'm a mechanically guy, I figure I can fix my own bikes. When I started riding, first thing I did was grab a Phillips screwdriver and just go to town twisting these limit screws. And I'm wondering, well, why is nothing changing? I don't see anything happening. But then I made big changes to the bike that I didn't realize until later, caused myself some problems. And then this screw here, that's all by itself. If you look at it from the back side, that's what's called the B limit adjuster. That just changes the angle that the derailleur sits when it's on the bike and the chain is under load. Okay, I can't really show you without moving it. Anyway, limit screws or off limit screws, please leave them alone. What they do is they tell the bicycle, or they tell the derailleur how far it's allowed to move. Low limit screw would be on the low side. So if you adjusted the low limit screw, you tell the derailleur how far it can move this way. Okay, you just tell it you're going to stop right here at this low gear and not move into your spokes. Okay, the high limit screw is going to be set to stop the derailleur right here on your smallest cog, your highest gear, and not shift outside or off the cassette. So if you start monkeying around with limit screws, you're either going to allow the derailleur to shift beyond the cassette and off and here on the outside, or into your spokes. And that's what I did. I messed with my derailleur, with my limit screws, and I ended up shifting my chain into my spokes and ruining a wheel. So don't mess with the limit screws. Leave them where they are. If you need to do any adjustments on the bicycle because things aren't shifting quite right, it's constantly skipping or whatnot, it's done with the barrel adjuster. Okay, and I want you to think about the barrel adjuster that every little quarter turn, all right, and you'll feel it. There's like little notches. It'll quarter turn. The chain should line up perfectly between the two cogs. So it'll be on one cog, perfectly between the cogs above it and below it. There should be like equal space between them. And I don't know if you guys can exactly see that, but as I turn this and I shift, that chain should move up. It moved, and it did it pretty silently, and it's now sitting perfectly between the two cogs next to it. Okay. So all that's doing is, as I'm releasing a little cable tension and allowing the derailleur to move a preset amount and land on.
Yeah, so lots of times a lot of slipping can just be because that cable is just a little too loose or a little too tight. And that barrel adjuster, that little movement can make that adjustment so it lines up right under that, like how you can see it. And I'm thinking maybe that might be what your issue is, Lane. I'm just by guessing and just from experience, that seems to be the most common thing. It's just a little cable tension issue.
So if you get behind the bike and you look, and if you look, and if it's not perfectly between the cogs above or below it, then you can turn the barrel adjuster and move the derailleur. Now, what you need to think about is you turn the barrel adjuster the direction that you want the derailleur to move. So if my chain is sitting too close to the cog below it, then I would want to turn my barrel adjuster toward the inside, and then I would move the derailleur toward the inside and line it up. That's the best way I've found to describe it without actually like having somebody right next to me to show them. And I'll just demonstrate here. You guys saw, I pedaled through here. Everything sounds great. No clicking, no bad noises. I'm just gonna randomly kind of screw with my barrel adjuster. I don't know if you can hear a little bit, but when I shift, it doesn't want to shift because it's not lined up. So what I'll do is I can look here and I can see that it needs to shift up onto the chain ring, to the cog next to it inside. So I'm going to twist my barrel adjuster, and there, it just moved up, and now it's quiet. And I shifted and it's quiet, and I shift down and it's quiet. So barrel adjuster is such a simple fix if you understand how to use it and understand what you're looking for to make the decision of which way to turn it. So leave the limit screws alone at first and go for the barrel adjuster, see where your chain is lining up, and then twist that barrel adjuster, make little adjustments at a time, and then see if that doesn't fix your issue. Any other questions about that?
I'm not seeing anything. I know we're quite a bit over time and a lot of people have had to jump off, but Mark, did you have anything else or should we open it up for just general?
No, that's really the end. I don't like to talk about front derailleur adjustments. That gets a little too in depth. If you understand, the rear derailleur, you can fix a lot. But that's all I've got for my demonstration.
Cool. I just sent out another poll asking people what other, if say they did want to do a more advanced thing, like what area they would be interested in. It doesn't make you choose. We're getting a lot of all of the above, which is great. But yeah, if you just want to fill out what you would like to learn more about, so maybe we can consider that for future programming. But yeah, does anyone else feel free now? We'll stay on here for a little bit. If people want to chime in with some more specific questions. But other than that, that's all we have for the programming. So thank you so much. And we'll probably do another one of these maybe later on in the summer. So getting, a lot of all of the aboves, replacing a chain, we have one person, learning how to service and adjust wheels, one person, 2 people for adjusting brakes, and 3 people for all of the above. So that's a good.
Replacing a chain, I can teach you to replace a chain really quick. I mean, I'm not going to show it to you, but you'll need a chain tool to replace a chain. That pushes the pin out, okay, and it allows you to set a pin. The thing is to make sure you're getting the right chain for the number of speeds your bicycle has, all right? And then use your old chain to measure the length. So that's really the biggest thing. If you get the chain for the number of speeds your bike has, and if you make it the correct length, it's not overly difficult as long as you just route it back through the bike correctly. And then it's really pretty simple. It's when you don't have a chain to start with that it gets a little tricky to figure out how long to cut that chain to.
And I wanted to jump in. Yeah, I guess we will be doing another class in July too. So that's something to look forward to or to tell your friends about. Looks like some people have to go back to work. So yeah, thanks Jeannie and everyone for hanging out with us on a Tuesday. It's really nice riding weather, so everyone should definitely try to go out and ride your bicycle this afternoon. I know that's what I'm gonna do. And yeah, like I said, we'll stay on until everybody leaves, just to make sure no one has any last minute questions. And we can send out this video plus the slides that I shared that had like the vocabulary and the gear combinations and the chain diagram and all that stuff. So you can use it for your own reference if you need some review or things like that too. So look to your email for that.